Am I in the way?
No, just watch the cord. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Life's Legends, the podcast where we talk about the stories that have shaped us. My name is Luke, and I will be your host. I am here once again with my mother. Say hi.
Yo!
We're talking about Peter Pan. We're still talking about Peter Pan. Last episode, we went over the story in general, the characters, and the world that this takes place in, and stuff like that. This episode is focused more on our experiences with this story, as well as how the story kind of came to be, and other stuff like that, as well as the moral, like what we think the story is trying to say. Before we get into that, we didn't go over any of the you questions before, but we now get to go over this, and I've shortened them down. First of all, Mom, what's your favorite animal?
An alpaca.
Why is it an alpaca?
Because their fur is hypoallergenic and I can rub my face in it if I want to.
That's delightful. That's a great answer. What's your current occupation? What do you do?
A lot of things.
Is that where we're going to start? We can leave it there. Do you want to leave it there?
Yep.
Okay, you do a lot of things. And what is your dream? Good questions here.
Wow, I got no heads up on these questions.
Yeah, you are the only guest that I have not prepared for these questions.
My dream? What do you mean my dream?
Yeah,
Like my
what's your
dream in
goal
life?
for the future, yeah.
Well, hopefully I'll be in heaven someday. That's my dream.
Okay, well, a little dour, but we'll take it. Dream to be dead. Okay, all right.
Pain-free, living my best life in heaven. How about that?
Okay, that's great. So back to the story of Peter Pan, now that those have gone well.
Gave me no heads up on that.
Back to the story of Peter Pan. Why you chose to read Peter Pan for this podcast. Why did you choose Peter Pan? What made you pick this book?
Well, I love the story. I mean, I picked the story. I just read it as a kid and loved the imagination part of the story. As I grew, it became more personal to me because of the loss of my father in my life, and at a young age, 14, and my life previous to that occasion of his death seemed charmed and like a wonderful childhood, and then after that it all kind of fell apart, and I then had this desire to keep everything childlike because that was where the happy moments were. And so after that, that's kind of what resonated with me about the story, is this desire to not grow up, to keep everything in the happy spot. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I just wasn't expecting that based on the other three answers that we've gotten so far.
Oh.
That's great. That's a great answer. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense then. Because the theme of this almost struggle between childhood and adulthood,
Right.
that pulls apart, that makes a lot
There's
of
a
sense.
reality that comes with adulthood that is not pleasant.
Amen.
And also death,
Oh, sure. Yeah.
not pleasant.
Doesn't seem like it.
Yeah, for the people who are left behind.
Sure.
And so, yeah, I really connect with the story on that level of this, Peter Pan hating adults and wanting things to stay as carefree and adventurous as they are in childhood.
Huh. So well, you talked about in the last episode that while Wendy's your favorite character, you actually don't. It's not like you see yourself in Wendy. That's not why she's your favorite
Not at all.
character.
She's
You're
opposite of
very
me.
different from Wendy.
Yeah.
Now I'm wondering, is there a level of like self-identification when you think about Peter? Like, is there some level of like similarities you think then with him.
I mean, only in the terms of wanting to keep everything kind of in that impulsive childhood adventure type thing. I don't go around murdering people when they don't do what I want.
Sure.
Well,
now, in a world where there weren't consequences for that, no, it's fine.
I'm not going to answer that.
We don't have to answer this question.
Yeah, and also, just the way he kind of views people growing up, and
Sure.
I'm not going to kill any Lost Boys when they grow up or anything.
That's
but,
good. I suggest that.
I thoroughly enjoyed, though, the chance to kind of relive a little bit of childhood with my own children. And I would think that I was a fun mom because I really do enjoy childhood. And maybe not. I don't know. You would have to answer that. But then also as a grandparent now, I am thoroughly enjoying this return to childhood again.
Yeah. Well, I think also, you left your occupation vague, but for a lot of that occupation, you've dealt with children in some capacity, a lot of your jobs.
Yes. I've definitely had a passion for working with children.
Right.
Yes.
Wow, there's a lot. We're getting a lot out of this. Huh. We're getting mileage out of this question.
We're getting mileage.
Great. Well, you kind of answered the second question. You did answer the second question, which is kind of what your experience with the story prior to this podcast was. So you did read it as a child. This isn't your first time reading the book.
I think somewhere in elementary school. I was an avid reader. I loved reading, and so I read a lot of things. It was varied. I read poetry. I read classics like this. I read, horror stories. I mean, I read just a whole bunch of different genres, and I do remember reading this. And then later, with the Peter Pan movie, I saw maybe around the same time, but they're also obviously very different.
Right.
But that is my favorite Disney movie for the same reason.
Whoa.
I'm sorry, animated Disney movie.
There we go. Let's put the caveat on that.
Mary Poppins is my number one, but this is
I was going to say
my favorite animated Disney movie.
I guess we have to say fully animated as well, but
yes, we do have to say fully animated.
I've seen Mr. Banks. I know what they went through to get part of that animated.
So
anyway.
This is Peter Pan would be my favorite Disney movie too, but I wouldn't say this is my favorite book as a child though. So
no, yeah, sure.
But definitely when you said something that connects to you, this is immediately what came to mind.
Huh. That's really interesting. Yeah. I had never read the book before now. I have not had a reason to. I've seen the movie many times. Not recently, but I've definitely watched that movie a lot. I think we had it.
Oh yeah, we watched it a lot when you were a child.
Yeah, so I'm pretty sure I have a lot of exposure to that, which is kind of one of the things that made reading the book so shocking, is the sometimes drastic differences between specifically character portrayals in these two.
Well,
the
book
Neverland itself isn't that different. It's more dangerous.
Yeah, I would argue it's dangerous.
But again, that's the portrayal of this thing. Disney just Disneyfied it. They made it all sparkly.
The PG. The book is not PG.
Yeah, I think Peter Pan's G.
Yeah. Oh yeah, but in today's terms, there's nothing G.
Do you think Peter Pan would be G? Oh, we don't have to care about that.
I don't think it would be put out right now because of the...
Well, yeah, we've got a native problem. Yeah. I agree. I don't think that would have passed.
No.
Although, I mean, to be honest, they're not that vital a part of the story. But, you think they're a vital part of the story?
I mean, they're definitely, an important part of the story. I mean, because that was was it John or Michael's version of Neverland? So you can't, if you're going to have a family resemblance, you got to have a little piece of everybody in there.
I wonder who.
I can't remember if it was John or Michael's version.
John's the pirates. That's why pirates are there.
Then it must have been Michael.
I think it's Michael. Though.
Yeah, because Wendy was the beasts, so it was John.
Wendy was the beast?
Yeah, Wendy was the animals that were. Yeah.
That's nuts. Who was the wasp? It doesn't matter. I guess they come with Peter.
Yeah,
don't
I
know.
don't think anyone.
They're
had
installed.
pets. Yeah.
They're real. They're real kids who've been trapped here. They're not part of anyone's imagination.
No.
Toodles is running Google right now.
Toodles. So yeah.
Yeah. So, it's a really interesting book. It's a really cool book, but one of the things that I think heavily influences how stories are like made and then presented are how they're composed, what they're made of. So this story obviously is a novel. It was written as a novel, but also was written as a play.
Correct.
And one of the funny things is, so I didn't do any of that research before I read it. I just read it first, and then I looked into J.M. Barrie and the kind of sort of the creation of this. And one of the things, I found several things interesting, but one of the things I found interesting is that it was actually first in 1904 written as a play, and then was written as a novel. And I think there's some places in this book where you can super tell that's the case, because the book will stop giving you he said or this character said, and it will simply give you lines like all down the page, and that's not that common of a thing to happen in longer novelists. And maybe it was in 1911 when the book was written, I guess, but it seems like if you told me take this and make it a play, it wouldn't be that hard for me to do it. Mm-hmm. And I imagine that if you took the play script and you said take this and make it a novel, this is exactly what you'd come out with.
Right. Yeah. Probably.
So it's interesting that it kind of like acts like that. Is there anything interesting that you know about the J.M. Barrie or the book or even the creation of this? I have other things. I just don't know if there's anything you want to highlight first.
I absolutely have some things I want to highlight.
Okay.
So.
Well, that's why I asked.
I feel like, J.M. Barrie, this is his working out of things that this play, this book, is his working out of how he felt about what happened with his life and the circumstances that he was dealing with at the time, the rejection of his mother, and how that played into Peter Pan himself and his hatred of adults and his hatred of specifically mothers. So, and this really resonates with me, and it's partly why I love this book so much. But
go ahead.
I will go on.
Take off.
So, when he was young, he had an older brother named David, and David was kind of the chosen one of the family. Obviously the oldest. I'm not sure if he was the oldest child of the family, but he was older than
Jay.
What's that?
But older than Jay.
Yes. And so
his name is James.
When they were young, someone pushed David while they were skating, cracked his head on the ice, and David died.
When you say someone, you don't mean... Okay, all right, we'll let this go.
Nobody ever specifically said it was him, the author, but it's alluded to. And so that he's the one that pushed him. It says a friend, but a lot of the research will say a friend, but some people think it was him. And so, now that's debatable.
Interesting.
I don't know. But what happened then is his mother was so distraught over this loss that she rejected J.M. Barrie and treated him in full rejection after that point. This changed their mother. And to the point where she rejected him. She then died at some point, and he then he was basically parentified, and he then became the guardianship of his other younger siblings. So at least that's what my research has come up with. But anyways, this was very intriguing to me because now it connects it even more to this kind of loss of a parent. But it's not the loss of for me, it's not the loss of the parent that died, it's the loss of the parent that remained. So he lost. It brings in this death, this fear of death that Captain Hook has, this fear of death, that even Peter Pan himself has.
Sure.
This fear of growing up, this wanting to keep everything in this childlike phase. Excuse me. So, but he also suffered the loss of his mother and lost the motherly influence.
Yeah.
And so this plays out. I feel like he's playing out his life right here in this play, this novel. But there's a redemption at the end, that there are mothers who are good, and his mother was good at one point. She just suffered this loss, and then there was this rejection. Now, I didn't personally have a mother completely reject, but I had a mother that went away for a while. Like, she just kind of lost it over the death of my father, and then we were on our own. Not completely on our own. She was still there. She was working. She was providing. But emotionally, mentally, sometimes physically, we were on our own. And so that loss of kind of that nurturing piece of what a mother is known for, I feel like is just portrayed in this book. And that's the point of him writing this, is almost like, this is the reality of life. This is how it's played out for me. But there's hope, that mothers can be mothers, and everyone needs a mother, and everyone can have, not everyone can have, but there's hope, is what I'm saying. So he suffered loss at a young age, perhaps at his own hand, which would be devastating.
Sure.
And
maybe would lead to why it would give a little more credence to him being wholly rejected by his mother.
And then fully rejected by his mother. So
if it was the case that he pushed and they knew.
Yes.
And even if it was an accident, I mean, it's not going to matter.
Which, probably was. But that
yeah, I'm not
there it is. It's like this hatred of mothers. You read the whole book and you're like, why does Peter Pan hate mothers specifically so vehemently? And it's just kind of coming out that way.
Well then it almost feels like Barry is saying, I'm Peter. Like Barry is saying, I'm Peter, but I'm wrong. I think
he's saying, I desire what Peter desires, but I'm wrong.
Yeah. And first of all, that is, I love that. That is an incredibly noble thing to do, think, and live out. But, that's great.
He doesn't have to give us the hope in the end, but he does.
No. Well, and he also doesn't have to portray literally every single mother figure that we see in a good light.
Right.
None of the mothers, no mother figure in this story is portrayed negatively. Wendy is overwhelmingly a positive character from start to finish. Mrs. Darling is also always a positive figure. There's not a moment where you're like, oh, Mrs. Darling.
Do you want to know why?
Is terrible. Oh, you know why? All right, go ahead.
I don't know this for sure, but I have a theory.
Okay, what's your theory?
Because children will love their mothers no matter how horrible they're treated by them. They will always remain faithful and true to their mother. And I've seen this in children that we've worked with from troubled environments who have been beaten by their mothers, pushed downstairs by their mothers. Doesn't matter. They have these really strong feelings of anger and sometimes even verging on hatred, but when the rubber meets the road, they will constantly defend that mother.
Right.
Children will always do that, no matter how horrible their mother is. So it's almost like he's unable to portray a mother in this horrible negative light, other than through this imaginary character of Peter Pan who's saying she would bar the windows. She wouldn't let you back in.
Yeah.
That's how horrible mothers are.
Yeah. And it would also it would lend a little light to this scene where Mrs. Darling begins to cry, and then this somehow affects Peter. that Peter at first is like, whatever, this is crocodile tear. Like, he ignores it, but as she continues to cry, he then unbars the window. He then feels as if he must let them in. There's something that...
Yes, he can't break her heart.
Sure.
Which he did in real life.
Wait a minute. Are we back to your Mrs. Darling went to Neverland theory?
No. I'm saying he cannot break the mother's heart because he did that in real life.
Oh.
So Peter Pan cannot break her heart.
So sad. That's so sad.
It's so tragic, isn't it? And this is why I love this story much.
That's really tragic.
There's such depth to this.
That's really tragic.
Yeah, he cannot break her heart.
Peter is a character more. That's so
Peter
tragic.
is the embodiment, I believe, of this author's desire to keep everything in a happy place, in a happy time before tragedy occurred. And
sure.
And that's why we can't get to adulthood, why we cannot allow adulthood, because with adulthood comes sorrow, death, tragedy. And so Peter will even kill a lost boy to avoid adulthood.
Sure.
Until the end.
You don't know. Yeah, sure.
That's my theory, and I'm sticking to it.
Interesting theory.
Thank you.
Theory. Yeah. Yeah, and it definitely paints... And there is somewhat of like a... At the end, there's somewhat of a noble notion to Peter's like deal he makes with the Mrs. Darling, and to let Wendy go for this spring cleaning. There's some kind of like a business transaction, kind of like that they've created, which you would think he wouldn't be willing to do. You'd think he would be wanting to take what he wants by force if necessary. But he doesn't do that, and that's interesting. And it also, I thoroughly believe that the book does not ever portray Peter one time as correct. Never does it portray him or his ideas as the correct ideas. Hello, listeners of Life's Legends. This month, when we went to record our podcast, unfortunately one of the microphones ended up becoming detached, so I lost the audio of my mom towards the end of our second episode here. And instead of trying to recreate that, most of what she had to say was already contained in this episode. And so I thought I would just come on here, say a little bit more about what I thought about the book, and then just wrap up this second episode. The only things I wanted to say is I wanted to draw attention to the connection between the crocodile and death, and how the crocodile represents, I think, death for Captain Hook and death in the story. The crocodile is much more of a force of nature kind of villain. It seems unstoppable, just like death is, and I think the ticking, there's no mistake that the ticking sound that terrifies Hook so much is the acknowledgement of your impending death. And so I wanted to acknowledge that, and also simply say, I think one of the biggest themes of the book, along with what my mom had already mentioned in the podcast, is the idea of responsibility versus innocence, of childhood versus adulthood, and how to make that transition well. And I think one of the ways that we make that transition well is by accepting that responsibility. I think that Barry was very clear in his writing about that. And from my talk with my mom, I think she would agree with that as well. But that's all I kind of had to add. I wanted to add those two things because I thought they were important from my experience with this story, and to try and cover it as fully as I can. So thanks everybody for listening. Thanks to my mom for being on this month's podcast and bringing Peter Pan. as a novel to us. I was very excited to read it, so I was glad that she came on and recorded the podcast with me. Next month, in the month of October, I'm going to have my friend Autumn on. When I was growing up, I had, we were family friends with another family. And so far, out of the four of us that always hung out together, me, my friend, my little sister, and her friend, I've had my little sister, Kate, and my friend Cliff on. And so now I get to have Autumn on, who is Cliff's little sister, and we get to talk about a show. We get to talk about the original Muppets show, is what she wants to bring to the Life's Legends podcast. And so I've already watched a lot of the Muppets. I'm very excited to be able to talk to her about that, and I look forward to doing that next month. So if you liked this video or the last video or anything that I've done, like and subscribe, and leave a rating if you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts. Do whatever you got to do to hype me up here. If you liked anything that we had to say, that would mean a lot to us. But until next time, savor your stories.